There was no bullet fired, but how did the Mafia boss die? This is Mafia 1. Jot, and welcome to another episode of Darkest Day, where today we look at the mysterious death of a Mafia boss and try to determine just what happened here. Was it foul play or a tragic accident? Let's get into it. Salvatore Maranzano was born in 1893 in Castellammare del Golfo, Italy. He emigrated with his family to New York City when he was about 20 years old. With such a vast web of crimes attributed to Maranzano, Kelly felt confident that he finally had the upper hand. Yet he was shocked when the judge presiding over the case dismissed all charges, citing lack of evidence. There he joined up with Charles Luciano and Frank Castellano, forming part of the very core of the new American Mafia. All were found guilty except Maranzano, who once again avoided prison despite being charged with everything from running a lottery to tax evasion to murder. And only a few months after the court case, he would be called to a meeting with officials from the Treasury Department. They had apparently kidnapped Weisselberg, owed them $500,000, and then took him to a house in Queens, New York, where they beat him to death before dumping his body in a river. The men were convicted and sentenced to various terms in prison, with Joseph Barbera receiving the longest sentence. But when they knocked on the door, a woman answered and told them that no one was home. They waited around for a while, but still nobody showed. So they left without making any arrests. And the newly established Kefauver Crime Investigating Committee, headed up by Senator Estes Kefauver. But what does the evidence say? First of all, despite speculation, there was no bullet involved in the murder. But doesn't necessarily mean that the police knew who he was. In fact, according to some sources, the police still didn't know that the dead man was Maranzano until his fingerprints were run through the system. Maranzano's head had been caved in with a heavy blunt object. Therefore, despite the fact that his name wasn't on any official documents, witnesses placed him at the scene of the crime. But given that this was the height of the Mafia wars, with murders aplenty, it's likely that if they knew who Maranzano was, they would have been eager to press charges. In fact, 2 other Mafia members died in similar circumstances, leading many to believe that this was a planned attack. We've covered a lot of strange and mysterious deaths, including other mob hits, strange accidents, and even the strange death of Elvis Presley. Thanks for watching. But that brings us to our final piece of evidence. But they didn't, even though it seems they could have. Then a week later, on December 14th, 1969, the police received a call reporting a dead body near the Brooklyn Navy Yard. Well, the answer remains a mystery. How? Because when they went to the room to question him, they found a key card with the name Samuel Martinelli written on it. The victim was identified as Salvatore Maranzano. His head had been smashed in with a heavy object, and there was blood coming out of his nose and mouth. And the police had strong reason to believe that he was involved. Was it the men Maranzano had worked with in the past? Instead, he had survived for some time before succumbing to his wounds. That suggests that whoever killed him must have carried out the attack quickly and efficiently, smashing in Maranzano's head and then leaving him there. Or perhaps it was the men who had just been released from prison for murdering Weisselberg. Maybe it was Maranzano's former associates seeking revenge for him, snitching on them to the feds. Or maybe it was the feds themselves, seeking revenge for Maranzano's crimes. Additionally, the police had never been able to tie him to the murder of Weisselberg, nor did they have any solid evidence that he was involved in any way. But they simply couldn't find any concrete evidence to press charges. Despite being warned not to re-enter the country, Maranzano flew back to New York under the alias of Samuel Martinelli, where he was greeted with news that 5 men had been indicted for conspiracy and murder, with authorities alleging that they were linked to the disappearance of a Brooklyn gambler named Louis Weiss. According to some reports, Maranzano was told to leave the country or face further investigation. At this point, even Kelly was convinced that the Mafia boss was protected by high-ranking officials and law enforcement, various other rackets, all under the watchful eye of local dictator Batista. Maranzano apparently enjoyed life in exile and attempted to stay away from the American Mafia, even refusing to speak the language in public to avoid detection. In 1925, following the Castellammare War, a brutal conflict between rival Italian gangs, Maranzano became the underboss of the new national crime syndicate, reporting directly to the boss, Charles Luciano.
Nice.
During the war, Maranzano ran a highly successful black market operation, providing cigarettes, alcohol, and other goods to both sides of the conflict, which netted him huge profits. However, as the war drew to a close, Maranzano's illegal activities came under increasing threat due to the efforts of a young, ambitious prosecutor by the name of John G. Kelly. Maranzano helped to expand the illegal gambling racket into lucrative areas of the U.S., including Havana, Cuba, where he set up an illegal casino known as the Cuban Club. It was there that he cultivated a reputation for violence, even reportedly killing a man in a game of poker over a cheating accusation. Later, however, he would become an informant for the FBI, leading to his release from prison and transforming him into one of the most trusted men in the entire criminal underworld. A man who later recalled the incident said, "He pulled out a gun and bang, killed him." The dead man had cheated Maranzano in the game, and the boss didn't like it. In the early days of the USS involvement in World War II, Maranzano was arrested for trading illegally with the enemy after investigators caught him importing Italian brandy and wine from Vichy, France, despite the ongoing war. So while others had feared Maranzano for his violent temper, the fact he could turn on a dime and betray those he worked with was not so well known until much later. Kelly eventually built up enough evidence against Maranzano to charge him with 41 counts of criminal enterprise, including racketeering, bribery, extortion, illegal possession of firearms, and even treason. However, with Maranzano now off the radar, Kelly continued to build his case and eventually succeeded in securing indictments against Maranzano and 14 others. Despite his continued success, Maranzano was far from untouchable. As a result, he moved to Cuba, where he continued to run his casino, as well as several brothels, illegal nightclubs. But in November of 1969, after nearly 3 years in Cuba, he decided to return to the U.S. The 5 men included Joseph Barbera, Thomas Ialo, Carlo Gambino, Frank Thierry, and Anthony Fatico. However, witnesses at the trial had testified that they heard Maranzano shouting at Wesselberg during the beating, saying things like, "You dirty bum, you're gonna pay me what you owe me." Still, the department wanted to question him anyway, and so detectives went to the home he was staying at in Queens to bring him in. It's important to note here that while Mirando had been known for his extreme violence in the past, he'd been in self-imposed exile for several years and had no known criminal activity to link him to any kind of foul play. So despite knowing that he was in Queens, the police didn't actually know anything about his whereabouts. It seemed pretty clear that this was a mob hit, but the police had no idea who might have been responsible. Even the Mafia families refused to comment publicly on the matter, though some members leaked information to reporters who suggested that Maranzano had been killed by the Genovese crime family because he had stolen money from them. Second, Maranzano had been living under the alias Samuel Martinelli, which, yes, was an alias he used in the past. Third, Maranzano had apparently checked into the hotel under that alias, and the police knew it. Now, to be fair, it's possible that Maranzano gave them the alias, and the police simply didn't catch on. Fourth, Maranzano's death wasn't the only unexplained Mafia death that day. The coroner who conducted the autopsy on Maranzano concluded that he had died instantly, but that the fatal blow had not been immediately fatal. They weren't trying to interrogate him or scare him into confessing something. They just wanted him dead. But why? If you enjoyed this episode of Darkest Day, please make sure to check out more episodes.